to hold off the very worst that nature continues to throw at them. Just take a look behind me. This is, or was, an ordinary terraced street. West End Parade, it's called. About meters away from me, you might be able to see a car near submerged. Now, this kind of thing, and this is the frightening thing about this crisis, this kind of thing is replicated right across a vast region. What we're seeing is one tiny window on the misery that so many tens of thousands of people are suffering. So let me give you the latest update on what we have on these floods crisis, affecting, as I said, tens of thousands of people living near Britain's two longest rivers, the Severn and the Thames. All residents in Gloucester, Tewkesbury and Cheltenham, an estimated 420,000 people, are or soon will be without their water. There are currently 4 severe flood warnings along the River Severn, and the River Thames is also beginning to overflow, with 3 severe flood warnings in force. Tonight, hundreds of square miles of homes and businesses in this part of Britain are under threat, and the best way to see the scale of the crisis is obviously air. So early today, I went up to take a look. Not so much a green and pleasant land, more like wet, muddy, and in some places downright inhospitable. Now, this is the 4th day that the BBC helicopter has been flying over these parts, and by comparing what happens on one day with the next, we can get some idea of what's happening to these floods. So Will, the pilot here, can tell which areas, in which areas are getting worse. Oxford is a city in waiting, the first telltale signs that it too might succumb to the seemingly unending rainfall. And they're worried because 4 miles upstream, look at what the raging waters have done. The road through Charlesbury is all but washed away. Now, I've made plenty of flights, helicopter flights over disaster zones in my years as a journalist. But to be perfectly honest, I never thought I'd be doing it over my own country. We headed west towards Gloucester and that of the flood zone. What we're seeing now is the River Severn, in fact said to be Britain's longest river. And what happens is that it comes in like this, and what we're seeing now meeting it is the River Avon. And just at the point where these two rivers meet is Tewkesbury. Explains why we've seen so many pictures of so much disaster in this place. Now, flying up here, you certainly get a sense of the extent of the damage, the geography of the flooding, but what you don't get, of course, is what's happening down there, what's happening to individual families. You see, after the waters have receded, there will be people here still counting the cost of this summer of torrential. Well, from the air, it's obvious that it's the towns and villages here in Gloucestershire that are taking the brunt of the floods. Officials are predicting that in the next 12 hours or so, over 400,000 people will be without power. Further up the river, the town of Tewkesbury is still off. Add to that the threat that things could actually get worse, and it makes for a dismal outlook for people in the county. Gavin Hewitt has spent the day in the flooded Severn Valley.
The River Severn, swollen, threatening, still rising. Just outside Gloucester, a desperate battle to save an electricity station. Thousands of gallons of water were being pumped out. The army was brought in to help plug holes with giant sandbags. Even Navy crews were drafted in. But water is seeping into neighborhoods. Power is already off in some areas, and residents are leaving.
About 3 o'clock, we had no water on the road. The sewer's all backed up, and that's when the water rose. It came in from this side, that side, and down the bottom. And within an hour, we had 3 feet of water in our house, and then the electric went, so we had to evacuate.
It rose that quickly?
It rose that quickly in an hour.
70,000 homes have now lost their tap water supplies, and that figure could reach 350,000 by the end of the day. We went to meet some of those choosing to stay in their neighborhoods.
Do you have any power?
At the moment, we have, yeah.
You have power, you have...
Yeah.
And do you have water?
Yes.
But bottled water?
Yeah.
Some supermarkets in Gloucester even though they'd lost their power, selling bottled water to long queues.
Basically, it's trying to get water, like, basically to survive. You know, I mean, filled saucepans and that, and I'm being really careful not to sort of waste water.
Other families, Larry and Bev Sweet and their children aged 4 and 9, expect to be flooded again later.
I see you've got piled all the furniture up behind you. Because the river's just about to come over now, but it comes up the storm drains.
We've got no electric.
No water or power now, no. We've got water upstairs we've taken up with us, but the electric's gone, so, which went about 7 o'clock this morning.
And here lies the biggest threat. Some water from the River Severn is already leaking in and testing the city's defences to their very limits. This is one of the most vulnerable spots for the city of Gloucester. As you can see, the water is already seeping under the sandbags, and also the water is just now 6 inches beneath the wall. If the wall gives, then the centre of the city floods badly. So far, the wall is holding, but it's under unprecedented pressure.
If the wall gives here, apart from a sudden inrush, and we'll be under about 6 feet here, and further down the nightclub and everything else, and where those guys are standing, it'll be under 10 feet of water.
The Prime Minister visited the city today, the emergency control room, knowing there are many here the authorities acted too late.
It is unprecedented, the amount of rainfall that we've seen. The response, I believe, has been magnificent, but of course we've got major challenges in the future with infrastructure and of course dealing with drainage.
So the towns and cities along the Severn wait. The skies are full of rain and much of the water from the hills has yet to arrive. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Gloucester.
Well, while people along the Severn are already coping with the floodwaters, there are warnings that the Thames is close to bursting its banks, flooding thousands more homes. Some are already underwater, as Richard Bilton discovered as he tracked the floodwaters down the river.
There are now some places here where this is the only way in. The villages along the Thames and its tributaries where water has taken over. This Helmscott, its inhabitants now growing used to 3 feet of water at its heart.
You just get on with it. You just get on with it. The water comes in, it ebbs a bit, flows a bit, goes, comes back. You just get used to it.
The damage here is widespread. The water's been like this for 2 days. It's not shifting, and local people are not happy.
No one knows what's going on. No one knows if it's going up, going down. You know, it went down and then it's gone up. And then we asked some guys who came earlier, said, what's happening now? And they said, well, they think it's going to go up again.
And these grim scenes are shifting downstream, washing into more and more people's lives. Yesterday, this pub was by the river. Today, it's in it.
That's our garden. They're tied up against our tables, yeah?
So now there's no gap between you and the river. You are now part of the river.
Look. We are part of the river, yeah?
So at the next village in line, they're readying themselves. Sandbags in place, waiting for what comes next.
So imagine what it feels like to be in this village right now. What people here want is for the water to level off. But the thing is, the river has burst its bank and the flow is constant, topping up what's already here.
And as it gets worse, the emergency services try to inject some control. The fire service have been called because this nursing home looks vulnerable to the creeping waters. Sandbags are running out, and tired fire are doing all they can.
All of us, including myself, have had our own homes flooded over the last 2 days, and so we've got people here whose houses are themselves underwater, but they're retained firefighters with us, and they're actually helping owing that back home they've got their own flood.
Inside, the residents, many with disabilities, look with increasing alarm.
Well, it's terrible, isn't it? Never known anything like it.
We just have to stay calm. It's no good panicking because you're not going to achieve anything if you panic. So it's best to stay calm.
But in the end, it was the floods that made the decision. Virtually everybody in this nursing home moved away for their own safety. Here, hundreds of lives continue to be affected by the rising waters that are expected to peak until the early hours Richard Bilton, BBC News, Oxfordshire.
Well, before we get on to our next report, just look at this. These are all people who live here. They've just been to get a quick drink to warm themselves up, and they're heading off back to their homes. Now, of course, the young, the sick and the elderly who are most vulnerable as the waters rise. John Brain has spent the day with one in Tewkesbury as they try to cope with the floods.
Okay, then get the kettle up there.
Prisoners in their own home, and this is their cell.
Coffee's up there.
For Edith and Ken Nation, a 6-foot upstairs study, their living room, dining room and laundry room.
Well, it's a real nightmare when you're not. I'm not one of them. Can manage in very small spaces. I like plenty space.
But downstairs is uninhabitable.
This is the second lot which has come in. We've managed to clear it and had a vac to get the water out. But then yesterday afternoon it's starting to come back in again.
At least today they had a proper meal. With them unable to go out, their son-in-law came to the rescue.
And the water's a gas cooker, it's halfway to a gas cooker. So we've just cooked them some hot food to take because they haven't had anything for a couple of days now.
You're filming as well, Ken?
Freezer's gone, my fridge is gone, there's nothing I keep. And somebody bought us some milk, somebody just bought us a loaf of bread. so that's how we got to manage.
The floodwater outside their home shows no sign of subsiding, but Ken and Edith, who've been together for more than half a century, say this is just one more challenge they'll overcome. In BBC News, Tewkesbury.
Well, let's get the latest now from our correspondents across the whole affected counties. In a moment, we'll be in the Oxfordshire village of Standlake with Caroline Hawley and Russell Hayes in Pangbourne in Berkshire. But first, let's hear from Rajesh Murani, who's at Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire.
Thanks, George. Yeah, look at this street. Street after street after street in this town looks exactly like this. The whole town centre that way is underwater. One man said he saw it rise 6 inches in just about 30 minutes. That man over there, he's just bought a new kitchen, hasn't even installed it. It's ruined. I've seen people pulling dinghies full of food they bought elsewhere because they're worried about supplies running out here. And then there's the problem with the water. Some 400,000 people by this evening will have run out of fresh supplies. They're filling baths, pots, pans, anything they can, getting supplies from tankers and from bottles. The water treatment centre that was flooded, there'll be no access to that for several days yet. The power station in Gloucester they were worried about, well, they think they pumped the water out of that. However, 15,000 people are without still, and there's extra flood barriers going up at the Castle Meads power station. So is there any good news? Well, tonight the Environment Agency are telling me that they think the water levels in Tewkesbury have peaked. In Gloucester, it'll be early hours of the morning. Tomorrow, the middle, the water levels could start dropping. That's the picture here. Let's go now to Oxfordshire, to Standlake, and my colleague Caroline Hawley.
That's right, this is a village bracing itself for trouble. Already across the county, thousands of homes have been flooded and hundreds of people have been evacuated, including those elderly residents.
Well, let's just pick up the situation in Pangbourne, the west of Reading. Like many communities along the Thames, it is a community in waiting tonight. If you look here at the Whitchurch weir here, now you can see the Thames flowing seemingly smoothly across it. What you can't see are the large concrete steps down which the Thames usually cascades through a vertical drop of about 5 feet. So you can see how very swollen the river is here this evening. It has been rising, as I say, inexorably, slowly through the day. And the most worrying thing is we're told by the Environment Agency that the river will continue to rise, possibly for the next 24 hours, is by the peak of it. Now, there has been no serious flooding here at Pangbourne today, but West Berkshire Council have just told me they don't expect that situation to continue overnight as the river creeps up. There will be some limited flooding in Pangbourne. I think the village of Purley, a little further downstream from here, will be more seriously affected. So a very unpleasant night for people living here. George, back to you.
All right, Russell, Caroline, thank you all. Well, that's it from Gloucester for the moment. I'll be back a little later in the programme, but for the moment, it's back to you, Natasha, in the studio.
George, thank you. So what is behind this freak weather that's engulfed homes, businesses and roads from North Yorkshire to Herefordshire? Well, here's our science correspondent, David Shipman. David.
Thank you. It won't be much comfort to the victims of the floods, but scientists are trying to work out why we got such incredibly heavy rain. One theory, and this might sound a bit strange, that the cause lies in the distant Pacific Ocean. The waters off Peru are unusually cool right now. They're rising up from the deep as part of a natural pattern, and that cooling is known to affect weather the world over. Some wetter areas getting even wetter. Now, in our case, the key impact involves the jet stream, the great river of air at high altitude that drives our weather. Usually in summertime, the jet stream flows to the north of us, so most rainstorms are well away. But now the jet stream is unusually far south, so we're getting wave after wave of rain. It's a pattern we'll see more of.
The jet stream is 30,000 feet up, but it has a direct impact on the weather down at ground level. And what happens when the jet stream is further south is that it brings low pressure systems across the UK, more than we'd normally get at this time of year.
So will this happen again? It was only last month that the north of England saw similar flooding. These scenes were filmed by you. Well, climate scientists say we're likely to get more violent storms. And new research out today says man-made global warming is adding to the problem. The government has promised to spend more on flood defence, but experts say it isn't enough.
Well, it does need more money, and I think the £800 million we've been promised by 2010 is a step in the right direction. But I think just to keep pace with climate change and the way in which defences eventually through natural decay sort of decline in value or the ability to protect people, we will need to continue to increase beyond that in the future.
So some very difficult decisions lie ahead. Our system of storm drains, for example, was built more than a century ago. Saw one for myself last month, but many parts of the country these drains have never been modernised. The talk now is of investing new systems and new defences to try to minimise the impact. Exactly the kind of scenes we're getting right now. Natasha.
David, thank you. Well, today in his first Downing Street news conference, the Prime promised long-term funding for flood defences with extra money for those affected at the moment.
Every advanced industrial country is learning that we're going to have to adapt to new ways of doing things, including improving our infrastructure and the siting of in the future, and to make sure that we can respond to all emergencies as they arise.
Well, the Prime Minister talking earlier on. Let's talk now to our political editor, Nick Robinson in Downing Street. The impression from the government, Nick, that we're getting is they're as surprised by the floods as we are.
Well, they had some warning. The Met Office issued a warning about a week ago that allowed the government body responsible, the Environment Agency, to issue flood warnings, rather general rather than very specific ones. And there was some criticism in the House of Commons about whether enough was done between that Monday warning and the floods that began on Friday. But the main focus of MPs' concern today has been about long-term preparation. That's all about the deeply unglamorous subjects, drains and ditches, sluice gates, all the stuff that keeps water away from our fields, if it's possible to do that. Now, despite the big promise of extra money in the future, the government did have to admit that it called for budget cuts last year, £14 million. And the reason, let's be honest, is clear. It's a deeply unglamorous subject, this, until it's your home or your town that's...
And briefly, Nick, Gordon Brown promises help today, but that's slightly at odds, isn't it, with the Housing Green, which confirmed today that new homes will continue to be built on floodplains.
Well, once again, this is about political pressure. Voters want more homes, they want cheaper homes, they want affordable homes in the areas. Some of those will have to be built, we're told by ministers. Floodplains, it's a question of the flood defences that come with them and the warnings that are given by the Environment Agency. We often want contradictory things. Cheap homes and homes that can be insured and homes that will never be flooded. It may be that that isn't always possible.
Nick, thank you very much. We will be back to the floods shortly, but first in other news today, Tony Blair has arrived in the Middle East on his first